Let's go over leetcode number 832, flipping an image. Now the question says, given a binary matrix, binary meaning we're going to have zeros and ones, you want to flip image horizontally, then invert it. Finally, just return the resulting image. So 2 steps to this problem. First one is to flip it, and then we invert it. So what does it mean to flip an image? It means that each row of the image is reversed. So for example, if we were to have an array of this, 1, 1, 0, we want to flip it by reversing it. So we will have 0, 1, 1. And next, we want to invert an image. That means we want to replace 0 with 1 and 1 with 0. And our array over here is going to be resulting in an array that looks like this. So 0 became 1, 1 became 0, 1 became 0. And this one became obviously 0, 1, 1 if we reverse it. Now we have our example 1 and 2. And let's just go over our example 1. We're going to have a matrix. So matrix is going to be an array of arrays. And each one of this is going to be a row. So this is row 1, row 2, and this is row 3. Our inputs are, okay, so this is our image. Now what we want to do is we want to first reverse our array. So that's going to give us 0, 1, 1 here, and then reverse the rest. Okay, so this is step 1, we reverse our array. And as you can see, all the elements are reversed. Now it's step 2. What do we need to do? We need to invert. And what does inverting do? We want to change 0 to 1 and 1 to 0. So that's going to give us an array like this. So as you can see, 0 became 1, 1 became 0 for all the elements in our matrix. So finally, after we are done doing that, we just return our array, which is flipped and inverted. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks. Let's go over our first solution, and our first solution is going to be the most easiest to understand in my opinion, but again, it's not going to be the most optimal solution. First, let's get an overall better understanding of the problem and how to solve the problem so that we can optimize it little by little later. First, we're going to create a function that takes in a matrix, and that's going to represent our image, and later we want to return the inverted flipped image. And time complexity of this solution is going to be O of n squared because we're going to have a nested loop, and space is going to be O of n, but later we're going to optimize this so that we can have a space of O of 1. But again, we will start with a somewhat worse space complexity because this is a easier solution. Now let's code our first solution. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable named image. And this is actually going to be my result. I'm going to initialize this with a empty arrays that's going to have same length as my input array. So I'm going to use array.from, pass in a length of a.length, and fill it up with empty arrays. And if I were to just return image, you can see that I have array of arrays, so a matrix with 3 rows or 3 arrays. So that's exactly the same format as my input array. And later what we're going to do is we're going to push our result or our reverse then inverted image into these arrays or rows later. Now, first thing I want to be able to do is be able to iterate through the rows in my matrix. So iterate through rows. And for that, let's just use a for loop. So start at index 0, I is going to be less than a.length. And we're gonna increment by 1 each time. And let's create a variable named row so that we can refer to each an individual row with a variable. And let's just console log our rows. As you can see, we have our rows, right, which matches with our input array. That looks good. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to iterate through all the elements in our row. So iterate through elements in the row. But there is one key thing that you have to note. We have to reverse our arrays, and then we want to be able to invert those elements. So first thing is reverse and then invert. Now, remember that we created an image over here, right? And that represents our result and has the same number of rows as our input array. How we are going to make use of this matrix is that we are going to start from the last index and then convert this number into the inverted number and then push it into our image. So first we're going to reverse it, and we reverse it by iterating from the last index, and then we invert it and push it into the image, which is our result. So let's code that solution. For that, I'm going to use a for loop again, and this time our index is going to start at the last one. So it's going to be row.length minus 1, and then our index is going to be greater than -1, and we decrement by 1 each time. We can make this into greater than or equal to 0. It's the same thing, but let's just leave it like this for now. And let's just create a variable to represent our current value. That's going to be row at index j, and let's just console log our current value. You can see that we have our values, but do notice that the order is reversed. So look at the first row as 1 1 0, but now it's 0 1 1. Second one is same because 101 reverse is 101, and finally we have all zeros. So we are getting our elements in reversed order. So we are done kind of reversing our arrays, right? But now we want to handle inputting the numbers by inverting them first. So we have our numbers reversed, but we need to be able to invert it and then push it into our result, which is image variable that we made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an if statement. If my current value is equal to 1, what I want to do is I want to convert or change this value into 0 and then push it into my result image variable. So what I'll do is I'll do image at index I dot push, and we're going to just push 0. And then next we need the other case, and it's going to be image at index I dot push 1. And there we have our result. So it became 1 0 0, 1 0 1, and 1 1 1. Now, if this was reversed, it would have been 0 1 1, and if 0 1 1 was inverted, it would become 1 0 0. And obviously, this one is inverted and reversed because we have 0 1 0, and finally, the last array, which is 0 0 0, it became 1 1 1. So we know that our solution worked, but let's just go over this one more time. So first thing we do is we want to be able to iterate through our rows, and we want to be able to iterate through the elements, but we have to keep in mind that we want to reverse our image and then invert our elements. So in order to reverse the order, what we did was we started at the last index, iterating through all the elements in that row, and we check, well, is the element current value equal to 1? Well, if it's equal to 1, I want to push in 0 at that same row. And if it's the other case, I want to push in 1 into the same row. So for the first iteration, we're going to look at the first row, obviously, and we start at last index. So that's going to be 0. And is 0, and we check, well, is it equal to 1? No, it's not, right? So we push it into the first index of the image variable, and we push in 0. And then we check for the next element, which happened to be 1. And this is going to evaluate to true. And at the first row, we're going to push in 0. And the next one is also 1. And then we push in 0 again. So we do this for all the elements in the rows. And then finally, we return our image, which is this. And let's just uncomment this solution to make sure it really worked. And you can see that it worked. So 1 1 0 0, 1 0 0, 0 1 1 0. You can see that it worked. So try comparing with the above example solution that we have, and it should be correct. Now let's go over our second solution, and our second solution is going to have a better space complexity, and that's because we are going to use in-place method instead of creating another matrix to get our result. Here, what we're going to use is, remember that in our previous solution, what we did was if the number was 1, we just pushed in 0. And if the number was 0, we pushed in 1, right? But here, we're going to use bitwise XOR operator. And what it does is it returns 0 if the values are the same. It returns 0 if the values are different. And this is the XOR operator. Let's look at our input array 2 or matrix 2. If you look, what we can do is we can swap the last element with the first one, second to last with the second one, and our array will be reversed, right? Because if you were to swap these two numbers, it will be 0 0 and 1 1. So 0 will be replaced with 1. This 0 will be replaced with this 1. So that means that we're going to have 0 0 1 1. So if we can do that, we can save some time because we can have the number of operations, because there is no need to go through the whole row when we swap these two with the last two. So here we are able to save time. And another thing is, while we are swapping 0 and 1, what we can do is we can replace the 0 with 1 and this 1 with 0. So we're kind of doing two things at once. We are swapping them and converting at the same time. So that's the overall logic of how this problem is going to go. But let's just code our solution to just get a better understanding. I think that might be easier to see. The first thing I want to do is I want to be able to iterate through the rows. So same as before. Start at index 0, I is less than array.length, and we're going to increment by 1 each time. Now I just want to create another variable named row so that I can just refer to my rows as this variable instead of accessing it by a at index I. And next, I want to iterate starting at index 0, and I want to iterate until my index is math.co and row.length divided by 2. I want to increment by 1 each time. Now you might ask, well, where did this come from? If you remember from our input array, we said that we don't need to iterate until the rest of the array, because when we are at the half point, that means that we swapped everything. So we don't want to go until j is less than row.length, but we half it by using this method. So there is no need to go on after the half point. Now what we need to be able to do is you want to store the current element, and this is just simple swapping of elements. And if you're not too sure, I recommend that you look it up, because this is something that you should really know. We're going to store our current value into this temporary variable, and we're going to swap. And if you remember how swap works, it works like row at index j. So this is our first element, and what's going to be our last element? Well, our last element is going to be represented by row at row.length minus 1, and we want to subtract j each time, and override row.length minus 1 minus j to temporary. This is just regular swap function. Again, if you don't really know how it works, I recommend that you look it up. But the logic simply goes like this. What we do is we store the current value into a variable. We overwrite that element with the value that we want to swap with. So for the first iteration, we are looking at 1 as row at j, and row at row length minus j is going to be this number, this 0. We swap those two, and then when j is equal to 1, that means that we move 1 to the right for this one and move 1 to the left for this one. So we swap those two, and we keep going on if there are more elements in our array. So first, overwrite the first value with the second value. Next, we overwrite the second value with the first value that we stored in this variable. But we are actually missing something, because let's just first return our input array here. We're missing something because we just simply reversed our array. And if you look at here, it's just simply reversed, right? And that's not what we want. We want to be able to invert it too. So in order to invert it, again, we're going to use the XOR operation, and that's going to require us to do something like this. So we have a hat and 1 here, and here what we do is we give a hat of 1. And if you look, we have our result. So first, what we did was we swapped all the elements, and then we convert our number or invert our number over here, and then over here, and then override it. So if you want, what you could have done is you could have inverted here, and that way we will get the same result. So again, here, just to go over the code, here we are iterate through the rows. Here, iterate through elements, but we do half the iteration, because again, we don't need to keep iterating through when we are done swapping. And next, what we do is we swap, and then while we are swapping, what we do is we convert or invert the number. Then we override it into our original input array. So this is it for our second solution. And there is another solution that you can implement. In order to implement this solution, what we can do is we can use something called, I'll write it here, Unary operator. And you don't have to actually use the bitwise operator here. So let's get rid of that. And this is going to be pretty much the same thing. Well, we know that this and this is either going to be 0 or 1, right? So if, let's say that this number currently is 0, Well, if you were to put exclamation mark, it would give the opposite value, right? But it's going to be false. And if you were to do the same thing for this one, it would give the opposite value. So what that does is, if you were to console log exclamation mark and 1, that would give us false. And if you were to console log exclamation and 0, it will give us true, because 1 evaluates to true and 0 evaluates to false in JavaScript. And this exclamation mark gives us the opposite value. What Unary operator does is we put a plus sign in front of that, and it converts that into a value. And that's going to be 0 because we had false. So again, 1 evaluates to true in JavaScript. And if we have an exclamation mark, that's going to give us the opposite value, which is false. But if we have a plus sign, that's going to convert that false into a number. And same thing goes over here. If we were to put a plus in front of that, that's going to be 1. So using that logic, what we can do is we can just put plus exclamation mark to get our solution. And as you can see, we get the same exact solution, but using Unary operator instead of XOR operation. So that's another way to do it, but the logic is the same. So we'll just end it here. And if you're interested in how Unary operator and how bitwise XOR operation work, I definitely would go over it online, because it's something that you probably use a lot when you do LeetCode problems. If you guys find this helpful, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Thanks.